In December of 1982, two men in their 40s walked out of the most famous research laboratory in Silicon Valley and drove to a garage behind a house in Los Altos, California. Behind the house ran a small creek, barely a trickle in dry months, named for the Spanish word for mud brick, Adobe Creek. They named their company after it. Within a generation, the software written in that garage would touch every photograph edited, every document shared, and every page printed from a personal computer on Earth. The two men were John Warnock and Charles Geschke, and the technology they carried out of Xerox PARC that day was a language their employer had built, perfected, and refused to sell. You are watching Empire Circuit, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. This is the story of two mathematicians who quit the most innovative lab in America because it would not ship their own work. If that is your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because what they built next changed everything. Warnock grew up in Salt Lake City, the son of an attorney, and by his own account he was a mediocre student who failed algebra in his first year of high school. One teacher turned him around, made him fall in love with mathematics, and set the course of his life. He earned his bachelor's degree in math and philosophy from the University of Utah, drifted through what he later called a mediocre start on his master's, and then, in 1964, solved the Jacobson radical, an abstract algebra problem that had been open for 8 years. He married Marva Mullins 5 weeks after meeting her. She was a graphic artist, and that detail will matter later. Geschke came from Cleveland, the son of a photo engraver, educated in Catholic schools, drawn to the intersection of printing and computation long before there was a name for it. He earned his doctorate in computer science from Carnegie Mellon in 1972, where a student had first convinced him that computing, not mathematics, was where the future lived. He went west to Xerox PARC, the laboratory that had already invented the laser printer, the graphical user interface, and Ethernet, and had commercialized almost none of it. Geschke recognized the pattern immediately, but before he could act on it, he needed a collaborator, and in 1978, he found one. Geschke established the Imaging Sciences Laboratory at PARC and hired Warnock as chief scientist. Together, they built a page description language called Interpress, designed to tell any printer how to render text and images on paper in precise mathematical terms, regardless of the hardware. Xerox adopted Interpress as an internal standard. Then Xerox did what Xerox always did. It refused to license the technology to anyone outside the company. Geschke said it plainly years later. Technology is like fish. Handle it late and it goes bad. In December of 1982, both men resigned, founded Adobe Systems in Warnock's garage, and named the company after the creek running behind the house. The logo was designed by Marva Warnock. The initial plan was to build a high-end printing services business. Within months, that plan would be completely overturned by a phone call from Cupertino. Their original idea lasted about as long as the garage did. Advisors pushed Warnock and Geschke away from services and towards software licensing. The team, now 5 people, Warnock, Geschke, Doug Brotz, Ed Taft, and Bill Paxton, 3 engineers whose names are almost never mentioned in the founding story, rewrote their page description language from scratch. They called it PostScript. It described the position, shape, and size of every object on a printed page in pure mathematics, rendering text and images with identical precision, regardless of the computer or the printer at either end. In 1983, Steve Jobs visited. He saw PostScript and understood immediately what it would mean for the Macintosh. He offered to buy Adobe outright for $5 million. Warnock and Geschke refused. Instead, they sold Apple roughly 19% of the company and a 5-year license for PostScript. The advance payments made Adobe profitable in its first year, reportedly the first time that had happened in the history of Silicon Valley. But the money was not the point. The printer was. In March of 1985, Apple shipped the LaserWriter with PostScript built into its circuitry. The retail price was $6,995. That sounds steep until you consider what it replaced. Xerox phototypesetting setups that cost upward of $500,000. A Macintosh and a laser writer sitting on a desk could now produce what had once required a full printing house, a trained typesetter, and a budget most small businesses could not afford. Desktop publishing was born overnight, and Adobe collected a royalty on virtually every professional page printed from a personal computer. By 1987, desktop publishing was a billion-dollar industry, and PostScript was the standard underneath all of it. Adobe went public in August of 1986 at roughly a $100 million valuation on $16 million in revenue. But here is the detail that sets up everything that followed. Adobe was still a company that sold invisible infrastructure. PostScript ran inside printers. No designer opened a software application with Adobe's name on it. The founders had built the plumbing of a revolution, not its face. That face was coming, and it would not come from inside the company. Three forces collided in the late 1980s that made the next chapter possible. The personal computer gave ordinary people a screen. The laser printer gave them a page. The graphical user interface gave them the illusion that the screen and the page were the same thing. Adobe sat at the intersection of all three. Revenue climbed from $16 million in fiscal 1986 to $39 million in 1987. And in March of that year, Adobe shipped Illustrator, its first retail software product, a vector drawing application Warnock had conceived as a PostScript tool, inspired by the pen and ink work of his wife Marva. Illustrator moved Adobe from the engine room to the drafting table. It proved the company could build tools that creative professionals would choose to open every morning. But the application that would define Adobe for the next 4 decades was being written at that very moment in a college apartment in Ann Arbor, Michigan, by a man who thought he was procrastinating on his thesis. In the fall of 1987, Thomas Knoll, a 27-year-old PhD student at the University of Michigan, was writing a program on his Macintosh Plus to display grayscale images on a monochrome monitor. He called it Display. It had nothing to do with his doctoral research. He considered it, at best, a useful distraction. His brother, John Knoll, a camera operator at Industrial Light and Magic, saw the program and understood what Thomas did not. This was not a side project. This was the future of image editing. John pushed Thomas to add gamma correction, color balance, the ability to read and write multiple file formats. Thomas took a 6-month break from his studies. They renamed the program Image Pro, then Photoshop after the first name turned out to be taken. They shipped roughly 200 copies through a deal with a scanner company called Barney Scan. Then John traveled to Silicon Valley and demonstrated the program for Russell Brown, the art director at Adobe. Adobe licensed the distribution rights in September of 1988. Photoshop 1.0 shipped on February 19, 1990, exclusively for the Macintosh, at a retail price of $895. Adobe predicted it would sell 500 copies a month. That prediction aged about as well as a floppy disk. Within a few years, Photoshop had become the standard for digital image editing across advertising, publishing, photography, and film. What had once required a professional darkroom, a retouching artist, and weeks of turnaround could now happen on a desk in an afternoon. Over 90% of creative professionals had it on their desktops. The word photoshopped entered the dictionary as a verb, one of the rare moments when a piece of software rewrites the language itself. Thomas Knoll, the PhD student who thought he was procrastinating, remained Photoshop's lead developer through version CS4. His brother John went back to Industrial Light and Magic, where he would supervise visual effects seen by hundreds of millions. PostScript had been the invisible language underneath every printed page. Photoshop was the visible hand reshaping every image on every screen. Together they made Adobe indispensable. And yet the founders were not finished. In 1991, Warnock sat down and wrote a 6-page internal memo under the codename Camelot. And what he proposed next was something the industry was not ready for. The idea was simple and, to most people in 1993, pointless. A universal electronic document format, a file that would look identical on any screen, print identically on any printer, and require nothing more than a free reader to open. Warnock called it the portable document format. Acrobat 1.0 launched on June 15, 1993. The industry shrugged. Critics called it a solution looking for a problem. Even Adobe's own board grew skeptical. Honest history requires a note here. The skeptics were not fools. In 1993, most document exchange still happened on paper or floppy disks. The internet had not yet made cross-platform sharing essential. Warnock was not answering a demand. He was betting the demand would arrive, and he was willing to wait. It took PDF 5 years to gain real traction. Today, over 200 billion PDFs are opened in Adobe products in a single year. Warnock was right. He was just early. And in technology, early looks exactly like wrong until the moment it does not. But even that bet would look cautious compared to what came next. By 2012, Adobe's business model was cracking in ways only the revenue charts could show. Creative Suite, the flagship software bundle, sold for more than $2,000 a box. Piracy rates for Photoshop exceeded 60% globally. Revenue spiked with each new release and sagged in between. CEO Shantanu Narayan and his leadership team studied the math for nearly 2 years. In May of 2013, they killed Creative Suite entirely. Replaced it with Creative Cloud, a subscription priced at $49.99 a month for access to everything, always updated. The creative community erupted. Revenue dipped. The stock dropped. This was the decision that could have destroyed the company. It did not. Subscribers surged past 3.4 million by the end of 2013. Within 2 years, annual recurring revenue from Creative Cloud surpassed the best year of boxed software sales. The transition was vindicated. By 2019, the stock had tripled. By fiscal year 2025, annual revenue reached nearly $24 billion. Adobe had done something almost no legacy software company had ever managed. It burned its own ship and built a better one while swimming. But the builders were gone. On May 26, 1992, Charles Geschke was kidnapped at gunpoint from the Adobe parking lot in Mountain View. 2 men forced him into a car and held him in a bungalow in Hollister, 60 miles south, for 4 days. His daughter delivered $650,000 in ransom. The FBI arrested one of the kidnappers at the drop point and found Geschke alive. He went back to work. He died on April 16, 2021, at 81 years old. John Warnock died on August 19, 2023, at 82. In 2009, President Barack Obama awarded both men the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, the highest honor the United States gives to scientists and engineers. Neither founder lived to see Adobe's 50th anniversary. What they left behind speaks for itself. PostScript still renders every page. PDF is an international standard. Photoshop is a verb in every language that borrows from English. Over 30 million people pay for Creative Cloud. The company Two Mathematicians, started in a garage behind a creek, pulls in over $25 billion a year. Adobe Creek still runs behind a house in Los Altos. The garage where Warnock and Geschke first wrote PostScript is a footnote now, and honest history should note it was a brief one, a few months at most before real office space, not the years-long origin myth that clings to every Silicon Valley founding. What replaced it is 3 towers in downtown San Jose, one of them dedicated to the founders. Xerox refused to sell what Warnock and Geschke had built, so they walked out, built it again, and sold it to the world. Every photograph you have edited, every document you have shared, every page you have ever printed from a personal computer exists, in part, because 2 mathematicians chose a creek's name and started over. If you have ever opened Photoshop, sent a PDF, or printed a page from your desk, you used what Warnock and Geschke built. If you remember the version, the year, the first image you ever edited, or the first document you turned into a PDF, drop it in the comments. Tell us what you made with it. The people who use these tools know more about what they meant than any history can capture. Subscribe if you want to keep digging into the companies that built the electronic world, because we have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.